When I came back home after my father's funeral, the house I grew up in was already gone, sold, not a trace of him, or of me, left behind just a for sale sign, leaning crookedly against the dry lawn, like a headstone that forgot its name. I remember standing there in silence, suitcase by my feet, wind tugging at my coat. My brother's wife, Marla, had always been particular about appearances. Her perfume smelled of sugar and money, and even as I looked at that empty driveway, I could almost hear her laugh echoing from the past. That was the moment I realized something was terribly wrong. My name is Daniel. I'm the younger of two brothers. Our father, Leonard Graves, wasn't a rich man, but he was the kind of man who could make a single dollar stretch into three. He worked 30 years at the local steel plant, saved every penny, and built that modest two-story house on Willow Creek Road with his own hands. Growing up, that house was everything. It smelled of sawdust, fresh paint, and Dad's aftershave. The living room still had the dent in the wall where my brother, Mark, once threw a baseball at me when we were kids. Mark was the older one, charming, confident, the kind who could talk his way out of anything. I was quieter, more bookish. After college, I took a job overseas teaching English in Japan. I'd send Dad letters every month, and he'd reply with shaky handwriting that always ended the same way. Don't worry about me, son, I'm proud of you. When Mom died years earlier, Dad had rewritten his will. He'd told both of us clearly that he wanted the house and savings split fairly between Mark and me. 50-50, he said, sitting at that old oak table, his hands trembling slightly as he poured coffee. Mark nodded with that easy smile of his, and Marla, his wife, placed a manicured hand on his shoulder. Marla had a way of making everything about her. She was beautiful, yes, but there was something sharp behind that beauty, a watchful kind of hunger. The first time she visited our house, she called it quaint, then spent the evening scrolling through listings of luxury homes on her phone. Still, I tried to get along with her. Family is family, right? The last time I saw Dad alive was 2 years before he passed. I'd visited for the summer. He was thinner but still had that spark. We'd sit on the porch drinking iced tea, talking about everything and nothing. Mark and Marla had stopped by one afternoon, and I remember noticing how Marla's tone toward Dad had shifted. She'd started calling him Pop in that sweet, sing-song voice, asking about his accounts, offering to help manage his paperwork since these things can get confusing for older folks. Dad seemed grateful, maybe too grateful. When I flew back to Japan, I left with a peaceful heart, believing he was cared for. But 2 years later, a call came in the middle of the night. Mark's voice on the other end was clipped, almost businesslike. Dad's gone, Dan, heart failure, funerals next week. You don't need to rush, we've got things handled. I remember the numbness, the guilt of distance. I packed and caught the earliest flight home. The first sign something was off came when I called the lawyer, Mr. Hanley, to ask about the will. He hesitated. Well, there were some changes made last year, he said slowly. Your father updated it. Everything, the house, the savings, it's all been left to Mark. Apparently, he wanted to simplify things. Simplify things. Those words rang in my ears for days. When I arrived in town, I went straight to Willow Creek Road. The house, my childhood home, was empty. The front door had a realtor's lockbox. Neighbors told me it sold just a few weeks after Dad passed. I called Mark. He didn't answer. Then, later that evening, Marla called instead. Her voice was light, casual. Oh, Daniel, we were just about to reach out. I hope you're doing okay. You know, it's what your father wanted, to make sure everything was settled easily. Mark's been under so much stress with the sale. Poor thing. The sale, I repeated, my throat tightening. Yes, we sold the house. Dad left everything to Mark, and, well, you were abroad. It just made sense to take care of it quickly. You understand, right? No, I didn't understand. I could hear laughter in the background, music, the clink of glasses that they were celebrating. That night, I stayed at a cheap motel near the highway. The walls were thin. I could hear the couple next door arguing about groceries. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering the way Dad's hands shook when he signed letters. The quiet trust he had in Mark. Something wasn't right. Dad was careful, thoughtful. He'd never make such a change without telling me. I drove to the cemetery the next morning. The sky was gray, the kind that makes the world feel hollow. His grave was simple, no fancy stone, just a small plaque with his name. Someone, probably Marla, had placed artificial lilies there. Dad hated plastic flowers. I knelt beside the grave and whispered, What did they do to you, Dad? And in that silence, I made a promise. I was going to find out the truth. Started with the lawyer. Mr. Hanley had been my father's attorney for years, the kind of man who wore suspenders and still used a fountain pen. His office smelled faintly of dust and coffee. When I walked in, he looked up, startled, as though seeing a ghost he wasn't prepared for. Daniel, I didn't expect to see you so soon, he said, standing to shake my hand. I'm sure you didn't, I replied quietly. I just need to understand what happened. He gestured for me to sit. Behind him, shelves sagged, with thick binders and legal folders labeled in neat handwriting. He opened a drawer and pulled out a file marked Leonard Graves' updated will. When he laid the papers on the desk, my stomach turned. The signature at the bottom, my father's signature, looked off. The letters were uneven, shaky in places they shouldn't have been. Can I ask when this was signed? I said. Mr. Hanley cleared his throat. About a year before your father's passing. Your brother and his wife were present at the time, Marla, and my father was of sound mind. Hanley hesitated. It was barely a pause, but it said enough. He seemed tired, but coherent. Yes, he said he wanted to avoid family conflict. He mentioned you were busy overseas, and that Mark would handle things on behalf of both of you. The words made my chest ache. My father, who had always been fair, meticulous, would never have used the phrase handle things. I leaned forward. Mr. Hanley, was this your handwriting on the witness line? He nodded, and the other witness was Marla. I stared at the ink. The pieces began to move in my head, slow, deliberate, heavy. Would it be possible, I asked quietly, to get a copy of this, for my records? He hesitated, then slid the paper toward me. Daniel, I've known your father a long time. If something doesn't feel right to you, follow that instinct. But be careful. Families break easily over things like this. I folded the document and placed it in my jacket pocket. The weight of it felt like carrying a secret that was both mine and not mine. When I left the office, I drove toward the old neighborhood again. Everything looked smaller. The trees, the houses, even the sky. Or maybe I had just grown out of the world my father built. Mrs. Callahan, our next-door neighbor, was sitting on her porch. She used to babysit Mark and me when we were little. When she saw me, her eyes widened. Danny, Lord, I thought you were still in Japan. I smiled weakly. Not anymore. How've you been, Mrs. C? Oh, getting by, she said, waving her hand. I still can't believe your daddy's gone. Such a good man. And that wife of Mark's, oh, she was always around here after you left, always talking about fixing up the house. Then one day, poof, it was sold. Said they were moving to the city. Marla said that she sure did. Pulled up in one of those big, shiny I remember because she had shopping bags in the back, designer names, said she was redecorating their new place. I thought she was joking when she mentioned selling the old one. Guess she wasn't. I felt the back of my neck heat up. Did she ever talk to my father about it? Mrs. Callahan's face softened. Your daddy didn't say much those days. He'd sit out back most evenings, just watching the sunset. Look, lonely. Double quotes, lonely. That word cut deeper than any betrayal could. That night, I sat in my motel room with the copy of the will spread across the bed. The cheap lamp cast a weak yellow glow over the pages. I traced my father's signature again and again, comparing it to the old letters he'd written me. The loops, the pressure of the pen, they didn't match. My father's handwriting had always been steady, even when he was tired. But this looked forged. I pulled out my laptop and searched through my email history until I found the last message he'd sent me. A short note about how proud he was that I'd renewed my teaching contract. His tone had been warm, clear, and his typing flawless. Nothing about that message hinted at confusion or frailty. Whatever had happened, it had happened after that. The next day, I decided to visit my brother. He and Marla lived in a new gated development on the outskirts of town. Shiny houses that all looked the same, with polished driveways and trimmed hedges. Their place had 2 cars parked out front, a silver Mercedes and a brand new SUV. When Marla opened the door, she looked surprised, but only for a second. Then came the practiced smile. Well, if it isn't the prodigal brother, she said. Come in, Daniel. I suppose we have some things to talk about. The living room smelled like vanilla candles and fresh leather. Everything gleamed, marble countertops, gold accents, expensive furniture. There were shopping bags piled in a corner, still sealed. Mark came down the stairs, adjusting his cufflinks. Dan, he said, voice tight. Didn't know you were coming by. I tried calling, I said evenly. Didn't get an answer. He glanced at Marla, then back at me. We've been busy. I held up the folded will. This doesn't look like Dad's handwriting. Silence. The kind that hums just before a storm. Marla's smile froze. Daniel, you really shouldn't start something you don't understand. Your father was clear. He trusted Mark to handle things. That's all you need to know. My voice trembled, but I didn't look away. Did he trust you too, Marla? Is that why you were his witness? Her eyes flashed. Watch your tone. Mark stepped between us. Enough. Dad made his choice. You weren't here when he needed help. We were. Help. That word again. Twisted. Poisoned. I was sending money every month. I said. I called. I wrote. Don't make it sound like I abandoned him. Mark's jaw tightened. You left Dan, and you don't get to come back and rewrite what's done. I stood there, heart pounding, looking at my brother, the man I used to share a room with, the man who once defended me from bullies. Now he looked like a stranger dressed in my father's money. When I left that house, Marla's perfume followed me out like smoke. But I had seen something. On the hall table, a stack of unopened mail, and on top, a bank statement addressed to Estate of Leonard Graves. I memorized the bank's name. If they thought this was over, they didn't know me at all. The next morning, I drove to the downtown branch of the bank listed on the envelope I'd seen at Mark's house, Westfield Mutual. It was one of those places where the floor shined so clean, you could see your reflection, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and sanitizer. When I walked up to the counter and gave my name, the teller looked confused, then excused herself. Moments later, a man in a gray suit appeared. His badge read Mr. Collins Estate Services. Mr. Graves, he said, shaking my hand, we've been expecting you. Expecting me. He ushered me into a small glass-walled office, offered me coffee, then opened a folder on his desk. I assume you're here about the final disbursement from your late father's estate, he said, flipping through the pages. I suppose I am, I replied, though I had no idea what that meant. He adjusted his glasses. According to our records, the estate was liquidated 6 months ago. The house was sold, and the remaining savings were transferred to an account jointly managed by your brother and his wife, Marla Graves. The funds were then distributed. Distributed where? I asked. He hesitated. Several luxury retailers, mostly jewelry stores, travel agencies. There's also a sizable payment to an interior design firm, Luma Living, I believe. My stomach dropped. That's not distribution. That's spending. The man gave a small, regretful shrug. Once the will was executed, we had no grounds to intervene. Everything appeared legitimate. I'm sorry. I stared at him, my pulse pounding. And you're telling me there's nothing left? He hesitated again, then said softly, there's a small remainder, a few $100s, maybe, but the primary accounts are empty. Empty. That word echoed inside my skull. Empty house, empty accounts, empty promises. I thanked him mechanically, though I barely remember leaving the building. Outside, the afternoon sun felt harsh, almost cruel. I sat in my car for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, until the anger finally pushed through the shock. They hadn't just taken money, they'd taken him. The years of his work, the home he built, brick by brick, the legacy he wanted us to share. That evening, I parked my car near Mark's neighborhood again. I wasn't sure what I planned to do, confront them, scream, demand justice, but as I sat there, engine idling, I saw movement through the large front windows. Mark and Marla were hosting people, laughter spilling out, glasses clinking, a dinner party. Marla moved gracefully across the room, in a silk dress, her hands glittering with jewelry. My father's money gleamed from her wrists, and there, hanging on the wall behind her, was something that made my chest ache, one of Dad's old oil paintings, a river landscape he'd spent months perfecting. He used to say, "This one's for you, Danny. Reminds me of the fishing trips we took when you were little." Now it hung like a trophy in her living room. Something in me hardened. Then I took out my phone and began snapping pictures, the painting, the cars in the driveway, the lavish dinner setup visible through the glass. If they wanted to build a life out of lies, I'd make sure every lie had a face. The next day, I went to see a handwriting expert, an older woman named Mrs. Lang, who ran a small forensic office above a stationery store. The room smelled like ink and paper. She studied the will under a magnifying lamp, comparing it to letters I'd brought, real ones my father had written me. After 20 minutes of silence, she looked up. "This signature has been traced," she said. Your father's original writing is steady. This one shows hesitation marks, unnatural pauses in the stroke. Whoever did this copied his handwriting carefully but not naturally. I felt a surge of vindication and grief. So it's a forgery, I said quietly. I'd say yes, she nodded, and a convincing one to the untrained eye, but in court, it wouldn't hold up. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My father's final act, his will, had been stolen, reshaped, twisted by the very people who claimed to care for him. I thanked her, took the report, and walked outside into the gray afternoon. The air smelled like rain. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, the way Mark had avoided my eyes, the smug confidence in Marla's voice, the tremor in Hanley's hesitation. They'd all known. By dawn, I had a plan. I wasn't going to storm into their house again. That would only make me look desperate. No, this would take patience, precision. The first step was to call Mr. Hanley. Mr. Hanley, I said, when he picked up. I had a handwriting analysis done. The signature on that will, it's forged. He went silent. When he spoke again, his voice was tight. Daniel, are you absolutely certain? I am, and I think you knew something was wrong too. He sighed deeply. I suspected, yes, but I had no proof. Your father seemed frail, and your brother insisted he was acting on his wishes. I'm ashamed I didn't push harder. Then, help me now, I said. There was a pause, long, heavy. Then, come to my office tomorrow. Bring the analysis. If there's a case, I'll help you file it. The next day, I was there before the office even opened. Hanley reviewed the report, nodded gravely, and began making calls. I watched as he drafted a formal request for the original will's submission, along with a forensic review order. It felt surreal, like watching a door slowly open in a house I thought was sealed forever. Daniel, he said, signing the papers, this won't be quick, but truth has a way of surfacing, even through mud. I left his office feeling something I hadn't in months. Purpose. As I walked out into the morning light, I passed a store window filled with glittering handbags, luxury labels, the same kind Marla favored. For a moment, I stopped. That was my father's money, my father's years, my father's love turned into fabric and gold, and I swore, right then, that I would make sure his legacy was more than that. I didn't tell anyone about the case right away, not even my closest friends. I wanted quiet, controlled movement, not gossip. People love to talk when money is involved, and betrayal makes for easy entertainment. I didn't want this to be entertainment. This was my father's dignity on trial. Mr. Hanley worked quietly but thoroughly. Within weeks, we'd filed a claim, contesting the validity of the will. He also sent subpoenas to the notary, who'd witnessed the signing, and the bank that had processed the transactions. That's when the real cracks began to show. The notary, a young man named Calvin, arrived at the hearing, visibly nervous. His hands shook as he adjusted his tie. When asked if he'd seen my father sign the will himself, his answer came out thin and uncertain. I was told Mr. Graves was ill, he stammered. Your brother brought the documents to my office. He said his father couldn't travel. I never met the man personally. The courtroom went still. Hanley leaned forward. So you never saw Mr. Graves sign the document with your own eyes? No, sir. I just witnessed the signature already on it. Gasps rippled through the room. I glanced at Mark. His jaw tightened. Marla's perfectly made-up face stayed motionless, but her nails drummed lightly against her purse. The judge's pen paused mid that sound. Her nails tapping would stay with me for weeks afterward, like the ticking of guilt itself. A week later, we faced the bank's representative. The transactions were clear. 2 months after my father's passing, Marla and Mark liquidated the estate, sold the house, and transferred over $400,000 to their joint account. Hanley spread the printouts across the table like a quiet storm. Do you recognize these? He asked Mark. Mark's eyes flicked toward Marla, then to me. I did what Dad wanted, he muttered. Did he want his only daughter cut out entirely? Hanley pressed. Mark didn't answer. Marla finally spoke, voice sugar-coated with false calm. Daniel, your father wasn't himself near the end. He said he didn't want his money wasted on your little projects. He wanted us to manage it responsibly. I stared at her. Responsibly. I asked quietly, you bought jewelry, handbags, a luxury vacation. That's your version of responsibility. Her expression hardened. We took care of him while you were off living your life. You didn't see the state he was in. That one landed like a slap. She always knew where to dig. Guilt was her favorite blade. I leaned forward, voice steady but sharp. You didn't take care of him. You took advantage of him. And now you'll face the truth. The judge called for order. I sat back, heart hammering, but I didn't look away from her. For the first time, she looked nervous. Weeks stretched into months. Every court date peeled another layer from their story. The handwriting expert testified next, confirming the forgery beyond doubt. The line thickness, the unnatural pressure in the strokes, all evidence of tracing. Hanley was relentless but polite, as if peeling an onion layer by layer until there was nothing left but the raw sting. And when the judge finally asked Mark to speak for himself, I saw something flicker. Maybe regret, maybe exhaustion. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said. Marla said we'd give Daniel his share later, when things settled. But the money was already gone. Gone. He said it like he'd misplaced a wallet, not a lifetime of work. The courtroom fell silent. I think even Marla knew, then, that the story was crumbling. The judge leaned forward, his voice measured. Mr. and Mrs. Graves, this court finds substantial evidence of fraud and misrepresentation. The will is void. Mr. Daniel Graves will be recognized as the rightful heir to the estate. Restitution will be ordered. It took a second for the words to land. Restitution. My father's name cleared. The will restored. Marla's face drained of color. For once, she had no clever words. After the verdict, I stepped outside the courthouse, into a gray drizzle. Hanley stood beside me, holding his umbrella over both of us. You did it, he said quietly. I shook my head. We did. You believed me, when no one else did. He smiled faintly. Sometimes, justice just needs patience. Across the street, Mark and Marla hurried toward their car. She clutched her purse tightly, as if afraid I might take that too. For a moment, Mark looked back at me. His eyes were tired, almost pleading, maybe for forgiveness, maybe for something he couldn't name. I didn't wave. I didn't call out. I just watched them go, their fancy car disappearing into the rain. Inside, there was no triumph, just quiet relief, and a strange, lingering sadness. Because even when you win against family, something precious always breaks. A few weeks later, I visited the old house, now legally mine again. The new owners were kind enough to let me walk through before they moved out. Everything smelled faintly of paint and new carpet, but I could still sense the echoes of Dad's life there. His laughter, his old radio humming on Saturday mornings, the faint scent of varnish he used when restoring furniture. In the backyard, the oak tree still stood tall. Beneath it, a small wooden bench Dad had built years ago. I sat there for a long while, rain dripping through the branches, and whispered quietly, "They tried to erase you, Dad, but I brought you back." I don't know if he heard me, but somehow, the air felt lighter. Later, I stopped by Mrs. Lang's office, the handwriting expert. I handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Payment, and a thank you. You helped me prove the truth." She smiled gently. Truth doesn't need much help. It just needs someone stubborn enough to find it. I laughed softly. "Then, I guess I'm stubborn." She nodded. "The best kind of stubborn." That night, as I sat by my window sipping tea, I thought about everything I'd lost, and everything I'd found again. Money could be replaced, property could be reclaimed, but dignity that had to be rebuilt from within, and I finally had mine back. Winning in court didn't feel like winning. It felt like cleaning a wound that had been festering for too long, necessary, but painful. The next morning, I woke up to a silence that didn't feel heavy anymore. No legal documents waiting on the table, no calls from the lawyer, no reminders of what had been stolen, just sunlight leaking through the curtains and the distant hum of life, moving on. But moving on wasn't simple. Even after the verdict, I'd catch myself replaying their faces in my mind. Mark's guilt, Marla's fury disguised as calm. Part of me still couldn't believe my own brother had been part of it. You grow up thinking betrayal comes from strangers. You never imagine it wears your family's face. A week later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it until the voice spoke. "Daniel, it's me." It was Mark. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt miles long. "I just wanted to say," he began, voice low. "I didn't mean for it to end this way. Didn't mean." I echoed quietly. "You forged Dad's will, Mark. You sold his house. I stopped, the anger catching in my throat. "You let her talk you into it." He sighed. "You don't understand. Marla said we'd give you your share later. She said Dad wanted her to manage things, and you believed her." I asked, voice trembling now. He didn't answer. The silence spoke louder than words. Finally, I said, you were supposed to protect his legacy, not sell it off for handbags and weekend trips. There was a long pause, then his voice cracked. She left me, Daniel, as soon as the judgment came down, took what was left and ran. I froze. She what? Unpacked her things 2 nights ago. I came home to an empty closet. For a brief second I felt a strange mixture of pity and irony. The woman who had built her empire on greed had finally turned her appetite against the very man who helped her. Maybe now, I said quietly, you'll understand what it feels like to lose everything you trusted. He didn't argue. I'm sorry, Daniel, he whispered. I don't expect forgiveness. I needed to hear your voice once. Before I could answer, the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. Anger wanted to rise, but it delined single quotes T. Instead, something softer came. Sorrow, the kind that sits deep in your chest and makes you wonder where everything went wrong. Mark wasn't evil, he was weak, and sometimes weakness can destroy more lives than malice ever could. That weekend, I visited my father's grave again. The rain had turned the soil dark and rich, the grass glistening like emerald threads. I knelt down, brushing away the fallen leaves. They tore everything apart, Dad, I murmured, but I put it back together. Your name's clean again. The house, it's ours, legally, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. A gust of wind answered me, cool and soft. I smiled faintly. Yeah, no, home isn't walls, it's peace. I placed a small wooden plaque at the base of his headstone, a piece of the old bench he'd built for me as a kid. On it, I'd carved a single word, truth. It felt right. Weeks passed, the estate funds were restored, the legal battle finally settled. Hanley, ever the gentleman, refused to take extra payment despite the work. You've got your closure, he said. That's worth more than any fee. I shook his hand firmly. You gave me justice. I'll never forget that. He smiled. Just promise me you'll use it wisely. Don't let revenge be the only thing you build on. That sentence lingered long after he left. One morning, while sorting through the restored estate files, I found an old letter, yellowed, tucked between Dad's workshop notes. It was addressed to me. The handwriting was his, bold and steady. My breath caught as I unfolded it. Danny, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. Don't fight over money. Fight for what's right. Things can be replaced. People can't. Remember, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom, Dad. I stared at the words for a long time. They blurred as my eyes filled. Forgiveness. Freedom. Maybe it was time. I didn't call Mark again, but I sent a letter. Short, honest. I can't forget what you did, but I also can't keep carrying it. Take care of yourself, Mark. I hope you learn from this. No signature, no return address, just closure. Months later, I started restoring furniture again, just like Dad used to. I sold a few pieces online, gave some away. The process felt healing, like piecing together splintered wood the same way I'd pieced together my heart. One evening, I looked up from sanding an old oak chair and noticed the sunset pouring through the window. Soft, golden, warm. For the first time in years, the silence felt full, not empty. They say family wounds run deepest. Maybe that's true, but I've learned that even the deepest wounds can heal if you stop digging and start mending. And as the last light of the day touched the workbench, I could almost hear Dad's voice again, calm, proud, steady. Good job, son. When I came home after my father's funeral, I expected grief, not a for sale sign in front of his house. My name was still on the will, or so I thought, but by the time I found out what my sister-in-law had done, the house, the money, everything was already gone. They said it was just business, but family shouldn't feel like a robbery.